Hello, friends. It is I, your little fuzzy pal Franklin, back in the workroom, back in front of the camera. Super happy to be here. I have so much to talk about today. Although I will say right off the bat, the knitting in hand, not all that exciting. Regular viewers will probably recognize this at this point. This is the everlasting sideways linen stitch scarf that I'm making in a couple of odd skeins out of stash of Noro Silk Garden sock, which I happened to have to hand when I got the itch to work on this particular type of project. It's become my ongoing thing that I knit when I can't focus enough to knit on the other things that I'm working on. How's that for a description? Anyway, I have been getting quite a bit done, I'm happy to say, but not all of it confined within the walls of the workroom. One of the reasons that I haven't blogged sooner than this is that Chicago experienced a shocking spell of clement weather around Easter time, the days on either side of Easter. And with the growing season as short as the growing season here in Chicago, if you have a garden, which I am very fortunate to say that I do, you get a set of days like that, you don't waste them if you can possibly help it. So I have been out in the garden and getting things tidied up and ready to grow. An awful lot is already above ground, hostas, ferns, all that sort of thing. My garden is not, it's not really mine. It is the garden that's attached to the little building that I live in. It's a small building for Chicago. There are only six apartments in it, six families. And it has this backyard that for the city is very nice size, and which was sadly neglected when I moved into the building close to a decade ago. I can't believe I've been living there that long. It's a long time for me to stay in one place. So anyhow, when I moved in, the backyard was, it wasn't exactly a pile of rubble, but it was pretty darn close. The building doesn't employ a gardener. The grass, such as it was, just really kind of a weed mix, would get mowed, and someone had put in some hostas, which are cast iron even in our climate, and that sort of thing, long before I ever moved in, but nothing had really been cared for. And little by little, and I have to say, without really asking permission from anyone, I started to mess around in the weeds and the mud, and then I took advantage of the chaos that followed the replacement of all of the back porches on the building. And anyone who's watching this who has ever lived in Chicago perked up at the mention of the back porches, because back porches are a wonderful and proud Chicago tradition. And the building had to have ours rebuilt. The time had come that they needed to be redone. And afterwards, the backyard really did look like just a bomb had hit it or something. And so I very casually began to sort of guerrilla garden back there, and over time the garden has become a true garden, and happily now the other people that live in the building really like what I've done. And I'm not I haven't been appointed official gardener or anything like that, but everyone sort of knows and explains to anyone new who moves in that I'm the one who is out there moving the flowers around and planting new things and improving the soil, and I love doing it. The very first day, I think it was the day before Easter, we had this sudden, out of nowhere, beautiful, picture perfect, blue sky, lovely lake breeze day. And I walked out the back door with Rosamond, and I could smell the earth for the first time in a long time. And on the spur of the moment, which is how things often happen with me, I just started working. Got the rakes, got the shovels, got my trusty hoe and my secateurs, and started going to work out there. And it was amazing. After about 4 or 5 hours of work, I felt something like okay for the first time in a very, very long time. Um, not reasonably okay or kind of okay or not all that bad, but good. I felt good. And Rosamond also felt good. She is my garden helper. She always likes to station herself near wherever I'm working and make sure that I'm doing things properly. And soon you will see what happens. I promise there will be video footage of this. What happens when the garden hose is attached. We have to unhook our garden hose and shut the pipe off from winter into about mid-spring for fear of the pipe otherwise freezing and bursting. So Rosamond loves being out there. I loved being out there, and boy, it felt good. But it was that day was the first of, 3 or 4, when I spent most of my awake time outside working in the dirt. And that puts you behind in other projects. A person only has so many hours in the day. So I didn't vlog, but I have been knitting and working on other projects as well. Most of the knitting has been done on the 1880s pattern for a shawl that I am preparing as a perk of membership to my Patreon patrons. And I love doing that. I love putting together patterns for them. And since my particular interest is historic knitting patterns, that's what I tend to go for. And so this shawl is knit in 2 pieces, the center, and then there is a border that's applied. And I finished knitting the center and was feeling very good about it. And however, in order to knit the edging, I have to know what the dimensions of the center are, the finished dimensions of the center, so that I can know how long the strip of edging needs to be. So what did I do? Well, I blocked it. I soaked it and spread it out, and it blocked absolutely beautifully. This is done in MJ yarns. I'll, of course, as always, put links in the description below. MJ yarns in their Sophistisock sock yarn base, and it blocked beautifully. I didn't even pin it out. I just soaked it for a good long time and then gave it some squeezes so it wasn't absolutely sopping, and then spread it out on the carpet in an out-of-the-way area and patted it out and let it dry. And my goodness, am I pleased with it. The pattern has opened up just as I hoped, and the size, which took 2 skeins, almost entirely 2 skeins, of the Sophistisock, has reached proportions that I think are satisfactory. Without the edging, the length across the top of the triangle, so the long leg of the triangle, the long side of the triangle, excuse me, is a little bit more than 6 feet. And that's satisfactory. That should be a comfortable fit on just about anybody. And when I publish the pattern, I'm also going to have recommendations for folks who might want to make it bigger, or I'm not sure why you would want to make it smaller. But, well, if you do, there will be suggestions for that. But just awfully pleased at how it came out. Even before blocking, I did some video footage, partly just for the joy of making the video, and so that I would have a record of how this project has looked while it's been in progress. So the drape is lovely, the feel is lovely, and the stitch definition for the lace is just, I have to say, really what I was hoping it would be. So hats off to MJ Yarns for making a really nice sock yarn. Highly recommend. And so now the labor begins on the border. I have my measurements for how much border pattern I'm going to need, and so that begins next. The center and the border are knit as 2 separate pieces. So I have started that border, and the other large thing that I am beginning is my second top-down saddle-shouldered sweater. The first one was knit in a DK weight from Plucky Knitter, their Traveler base, and I'm very, very happy with it. And the pattern that I followed, of course, was the custom fit pattern that was generated over at Franco.com. Since I've now done a sort of plain vanilla version of the sweater, I'm going to follow on to part 2 of this project, which is I'm going to do the same pattern, also custom fit, also from Franco.com, but I am now switching over to a fingering weight. So the gauge on this one is going to be much finer. And in addition, rather than it being a completely plain vanilla sweater, there's going to be detailing on it. Specifically, on the saddles and running down the sleeves, I want to include very, very, very handsome pattern in a technique that has many names in English. In German, falls under the general umbrella category of Bauerliches Stricken. I'm sorry, my German it's bad. Everyone who speaks German who just heard me say that will know that already, and I apologize to you from the bottom of my heart. But it comes from this category that is sometimes called peasant knitting, or sometimes called strickmuster, decorative knitting. And the particular technique in English you will find under names such as traveling twisted stitch, Bavarian twisted stitch, Austrian twisted stitch. The names are about as accurate as the names for any technique in English ever are, which is to say, not particularly. And I have wanted to do a large-scale piece with this technique for the longest time. It's a technique that I often teach, and I absolutely love the way that it works, and I love that you have this galaxy of beautiful patterns at your fingertips that are based on very, very, very few maneuvers that you have to learn. Effectively, it mostly comes down to what's called a right cross and a left cross. I won't attempt a tutorial here in this video, but I'll put up some images of what the stuff looks like. I absolutely love it, and I want it running from the saddles continuously as little panels down each sleeve. And I got all excited about this, and of course did swatches, which you'll see in earlier episodes of the vlog, and got all excited, and as I often do, I did not think everything through. What I did not think through particularly is that this lovely method for the top-down saddle shoulder from Franco works very well, and much of it is in the round, but not all of it is in the round. And specifically, the saddles themselves and the uppermost part of the sweater are actually worked flat, are worked back and forth, as opposed to round and round and round. And traveling twisted stitch is not the most congenial thing to knit back and forth. When I teach any technique classes where the technique goes back to a folk tradition, a genuine folk tradition of any kind, I always say to my students that if this technique seems to be fuzzy or fiddly or makes you want to, rip your own eyes out with a grapefruit spoon from frustration, then try to get closer to the way it was originally done. Because folk traditions, let me tell you, in this is my experience and my opinion, they can be intricate and they can be certainly complex. But what they usually are not, folk techniques, is they are not fussy and they are not tedious. Because if they are genuine folk traditions put together by genuine folk, meaning, the peasant classes, the class that I come from, heaven knows, on both sides of my family, the thing about peasants is they don't have free time to fuss around with techniques that require fiddly little bits here and fiddly little bits there, and most of the time, if you get back to their roots, folk techniques will reveal themselves to be, again, they may be complex, but what they won't be is fussy. You'll be able to see how that technique could be traced back to a knitter who had a lot going on in her life, who had to know that whatever she was knitting, however complex the finished result might be, that technique or that piece of knitting could be picked up and put down. And picked up and put down. Interruptions could be constant. But it would be something that you could learn and keep in your head as a person who was often either illiterate or only semi-literate. And so usually these techniques resolve themselves into a concise toolkit of maneuvers that can be easily taken on board. Usually it's very few things with almost infinite possibilities. That's how traveling twisted stitch has always seemed to me. It's the thing I've always loved about it. But the oldest pictures that I can find of people doing it and the oldest pieces that I've been able to study of this technique, they are all traceable to circular knitting, going around and around and around. And when you are going in circles, frankly, traveling twisted stitch, I mean, I find it to be a picnic and a holiday, and I absolutely love it. It's one of the reasons that I teach it all the time. I only teach classes about techniques that I love. If I stop loving a technique, I stop teaching the class. So there I am, all excited for this particular sweater, and I've done my gauge, I've got my pattern generated, I'm all set to go. The yarn has been wound up, and oh, look at this yarn. Look at this yarn. Here I am winding it. This is stone soup fingering from Bare Naked Wools. I'll put of course, a link down in the show notes so that you can look for more information on this stuff. I absolutely love it. It's an unusual yarn that is made with great care by good people. I mean, what else could you possibly ask for? And so I had that all wound up and all good to go. And then I realized this traveling twisted stitch technique that is so fantastic to knit in the round, but not so much fun to knit flat. Well, I have to start the sweater by knitting it flat. So what am I going to do? And I considered a lot of different ideas. I thought, number one, suck it up and figure out, how to knit it flat. On the reverse side, your knits become purls and your purls become knits, and your left crosses become right crosses, and your right crosses become left crosses, and you're crossing purls instead of crossing knits. And if it sounds like this would not be any fun, that's because it would not be any fun. So I thought, well, maybe I'll do that. And I rapidly decided that I was not going to do that. And then I thought, well, I could make myself a little tube, and I could knit both saddles at the same time as a very small tube, sort of like a sock, basically, actually very much like a sock, but then steek it, then secure and cut it in two places so that my tube would become the two flat pieces. And that's certainly doable. I also teach steeks all the time and love them. If you've heard, by the way, little sidebar here, oh, steeks are very scary and they're terrifying and you must lie down in a dark room with a cold cloth on your head afterwards, or drink heavily, or whatever your particular coping mechanism with trauma happens to be. It's not true. It's not true. Steeks are almost boringly straightforward. But the exciting thing about them is that once you learn how to do them and how straightforward you are, they open up new vistas for you in your knitting life. So if you haven't learned, do learn. Lots of people are teaching classes. I'm on a teaching hiatus right now, but I have a feeling I just have this urge to teach steeking again soon, so maybe that will happen. Anyhow, so I considered that, and I'm certainly not afraid of steeks, but the more I contemplated how this would need to work and what I would need to do, it just seemed like it was not going to save me any sort of tedium. It was just going to create a different kind of tedium. And so what I have settled on, and we shall see how this goes. Maybe in the next episode I will have something to show you. I have decided that I am going to knit the piece flat, as it's supposed to be knit, but rather than knitting back and forth, in other words, knitting a right side row, turning the work, knitting across the wrong side, and so forth, which is usually how flat knitting goes. Instead, I will be, the technique is often called knitting backwards. And that means that I will not turn the work. I will knit across a right side row from right to left. And then, without turning the work, I will work the following row, left to right. And the right side of the fabric will always be facing me, meaning I'll never have to think about reversing the pattern. I'll always be looking at it. And that is something that I learned how to do a long time ago, knitting backwards. But I've only done knitting backwards more or less in plain stockinette, not in anything more complicated than in, say, a knit one, purl one ribbing. And I did consider even various other options. Maybe I'll just do the shoulders as simple ribbing, and then when I reach the part where of the sweater that becomes circular, then I will switch over. I'll break out from that ribbing right into the pattern. And I tried everything, and I'm not going to be happy with this sweater unless I give it a go and try to do what I wanted to do originally, with the pattern running all the way down from the saddle to the cuff. I am not going to be pleased unless I do that, unless I at least try. So that's what I'm going to do. I will be knitting backwards in pattern. So, but I am excited about it. I really am. However, I'm not very far along, because you jump right off the bat with the Franco pattern into those saddles. And so that's a thing that I need to be refreshed, and it needs to be mid-morning, and everything in my brain needs to be sort of focused and clicking before I can jump in on that. So, so I'm really excited about that. In other news, a new issue of Piecework magazine is out, and I'm delighted to say that I have another article in there. This is a departure. Previously for Piecework, I have been writing about items from my collection of historic sewing and knitting tools. But this time the article is about Fox and Box, is about my dollhouse book project, which I've talked about in some previous episodes. I'll put up a link here to the Fox and Box website if you'd like to learn more. And I'm really tickled, because what they asked me to do was talk about the project, and then there's a pattern in there along with it. I have put in the pattern for a piece of miniature needlework that is in the house, which is the pattern for Enid's coverlet. So it is a miniature coverlet knitted in squares in a manner very common in the 19th and early 20th centuries. And then the squares are sewn together to make the finished piece, and then an edging is added to that. It's my little version of a full-size pattern that was one of hundreds, maybe thousands, I haven't found a way to count them, for counterpane squares that had a leaf at the center. And I write about the challenges, in the article I write about the challenges of translating something large to something small, because there is more to it than you might imagine. You cannot simply scale down your gauge. You can't just knit what you might have knit on with a worsted weight cotton on appropriate sized needles. You can't just knit the same thing with thread on little tiny needles and expect that it's going to work, because it doesn't always. So part of the frustration, but also part of the fun. So if you are interested in that kind of thing, check out Piecework. Check out Piecework in any case. I love them. I love working for them, and I do the work for them out of love for the publication. So, highly recommend. Also, realize I forgot to mention, I want to put a book recommendation into this episode. So you might have wondered, where am I getting the traveling twisted stitch pattern that I'm going to be using in the new sweater? And the answer is this book, which is the English language edition of a 3-volume German classic, and this edition from Schoolhouse Press has all 3 volumes in one. So you buy one book, you get all 3 of the original books, but very nicely translated into English. And it's a book I have gone to so many times. The English title is Twisted Stitch Knitting, and the author is Maria Erlbacher, and the book's from Schoolhouse Press. Schoolhouse Press, if you don't know them, man, they are legendary, founded by knitting goddess Elizabeth Zimmerman, then handed on to Meg Swanson, her daughter, and now Meg has been joined by Cully Swanson, her son, in carrying on the family tradition. Remarkable books for really curious knitters. They carry and produce a lot of things that you're not going to find from other knitting publishers, this book being one of them. I can't remember how many years Meg said it took them to persuade Maria Erlbacher to permit an English language edition. Anyhow, I'll put a link to the book down below if you're curious to see more of it, find out more about it. It's one of the standards on my knitting bookshelf that will still be there when I pass away. I mean, I have used it that much. So, so if you're curious as to where I'm getting the traveling stitch patterns, that's my go-to. I just love it. So actually, what I hope to do is see you again soon, either in another vlog or by way of the blocking video that I am working on, how to wet block your knits. Now, I hoped it would be done by now, but you never guess what happened. Same thing that always happens with me. Why, when you could do a very simple, straightforward how-to video on wet blocking knits, why not make it much more complicated than that and do a sort of medium-length documentary on the topic of blocking and what it is and how it works and why we do it and then how to do it, and also throw in a lot of graphics and cartoons and that sort of thing just to make it more fun to watch. Why not? So that's what I'm doing. So one way or another, I hope to be back soon and to see you again soon. And I hope that you are happy, I hope that you are healthy, and I hope that you are enjoying the heck out of whatever it is that you're stitching on. So keep on stitching, keep on doing what you're doing. Until then. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to my channel so you'll be the first to know about future episodes. Click like or leave me a comment to let me know your thoughts. And if you really, really liked what you saw, check out my Patreon campaign, where my patrons enjoy exclusive access to downloads, live streams, and other bonus material every week.